Hello and welcome to the Car Motivators Webcast Network. Today's guest is Matt Pope. He is a risk manager for the Insurance Office of America. It is not a federal agency. It's probably far more efficient at that. Matt has represented the franchised auto, heavy truck, and equipment dealership markets for over 20 years, working with over 250 dealers as a certified risk manager. He uses his expertise to help clients develop a cost-effective risk management culture. That's not easily done, by the way, that serves the needs of clients and their business partners. Matt looks to identify circumstances that may adversely affect his clients in order to provide appropriate strategies to protect both their business and personal assets. All of that is why he's here today. We're going to see if he has a crystal ball as well and ask him some questions about the future. And I'll try not to be too political, but let's just be real here. The government has mandated upon us the electric vehicle as a supposed green alternative, which carries with it risks, liability, and perhaps other issues we don't know about yet. Matt, thanks for jumping on.
Sure.
Tell us about your company, the Insurance Office of America.
Well, it's been around for about 35 years now, and it is one of the top 20 brokerages in the country, but it's also probably one of the top 3 or 4 independently, privately owned insurance agencies. John Rittenauer, our founder, basically back in the 80s, decided he wanted to move to an area of the country that was growing, and he decided to relocate from Pittsburgh to Orlando, Florida, and started off with himself and his wife, and they've built a company that is now about $2.3 billion in premiums, $260 million in revenues, and has almost 2,000 employees. So I think they did fairly well.
Outstanding on every level.
Yeah. But we're extremely engaged with our clients from the standpoint in a risk management conversation. Like we talk about, a lot of what we try to do is culture related. And as you've mentioned, it's not easy to change culture. And that is one of the things that is going to be pushed in the direction of a lot of these dealers, because the electronic vehicle world is a different culture. It's a different culture from how they're serviced, the liability associated with them, and then, like we started off with, kind of the long-term viability based on all the different regulations and things that are going to be mandated, each and every day that they've got to meet with. So it is a challenge that's not going to go away anytime soon, and we just try to help them figure out what's out there and make sure that they're still doing what's best for their dealership and obviously for their clients.
Yeah. Well, let's kind of get right to the beginning of everything. In your position, where does one even begin to assess the various risk factors with new technology? What does that process look like, and who's involved?
Well, a lot of it is certainly driven by the market itself. One of the unique things about the insurance industry is as a new type of technology, or for that matter, a new type of emerging risk comes forward, the market will pretty much kind of spring into action, figure out, okay, do we have this covered somewhere? If it's not, is there an ability to do it effectively and to make money? And so that's kind of the initial stages of the process. Once they do that, any number of market players will decide, okay, we're going to enter the market. We're going to construct a policy that we think will protect the clients, but at the same time isn't so broad that it makes it almost impossible, to really insure them effectively. And from there, other players will come into the market, and eventually you'll establish, a fairly significant ability to insure whatever that particular risk was moving forward. With the electronic vehicle market, one of the things that's going to be interesting kind of going forward in the future, the liability side of it is a little bit, there's a little bit to that, but in many ways, I think what's really going to be more challenging for the dealers is the whole concept of what do we do when one of these vehicles or a number of these vehicles are in our care, custody, and control for us to work on. As it stands right now, the manufacturers are mandating that they have to have separate areas in their shop for these vehicles. They're going to have very specifically trained mechanics that will only be the ones that are allowed to work on these vehicles. There are certain parts of the vehicles themselves, in particular right now, the batteries, that are they're still not a great level of knowledge about being able to service those batteries on site. So there's going to have to be a swap with another battery that will have to be held and stored somewhere in a cold storage, as a matter of fact, at the dealership. So it just creates a whole different set of circumstances that a dealer obviously is not used to having to deal with at this point in time. So responding to that from an insurance standpoint, is the policy currently written in such a way that it gives them the protections that they need if something happens to one of these vehicles while it's in their care, custody, and control? That's kind of where we're starting to figure out with a number of the companies that, okay, yeah, we're satisfied with how our policy is written, or no, we're kind of worried about all of the stipulations that are being put on these dealers and all the things that they have to do. Maybe we need to make some changes, and we're kind of in the middle of learning about all of them.
Well, along those lines, since we're dealing with self-driving, data storing, hackable supercomputers on wheels, basically, yep. This is going to be a kind of a broad question, but I think it makes sense. Does protective legislation have to go into effect to protect manufacturers and dealerships from unknown risks, much in the same way Clinton passed the 1996 Telecommunications Act that created immunity for big comm and tech companies, who erect powerful cell phone towers and such, which are linked to health problems, or the pharma industry for that matter, which is wholly protected against lawsuits for bad medicine?
It's an excellent point, and the answer is, I think we haven't figured out where we're really going to land on that yet. One of the things that is important that we try to address with our dealers right from the beginning is that when we get into the electronic vehicle world, one of the great sources of revenue that the manufacturers see, I believe, is the actual the software piece of it, right? Them being able to upgrade the hard drives on these vehicles, through some sort of an annual subscription, if that's the best way to put it. And they're constantly swapping software back and forth into these vehicles. One of the challenges with that is that we're trying to figure out, okay, if they're doing that, is it the manufacturer that is going to be solely liable for any mischief that occurs from that type of system? Is the dealer going to be held responsible for any of that? Is the manufacturer going to indemnify for any of that? So we're now moving into a world where if they're responsible for selling software and technology, instead of just having the old-fashioned cyber liability policy, which we sell a great deal of right now, they also have to be more concerned and sell what they call a technology E&O policy as well to cover them in case they're responsible for these things. And as I've mentioned, a lot of this stuff is now just bubbling to the surface, and we're having those conversations.
Yeah. Well, let's stay along the line. I think we're going in the right direction here, kind of getting to the meat of the matter. And if I'm an EV dealer or a manufacturer, what additional coverage do I need? And how comprehensive is that protection, considering some risks with EV technology that haven't even been fleshed out yet? And I'll give you two examples. One are lithium batteries that explode when they come in contact with salt water, and they burn extremely hot.
Yep.
And then in cold weather, EVs have such low clearance, and we mentioned it before we started recording this,
right,
that the freeways across the snow belt and up in the mountains are literally littered with bumpers and fenders that couldn't stand up to the snow and ice. Not to mention that the batteries run so hot that they melt the snow beneath them, and then when they cool down, it creates a giant ice cube, and it basically locks the vehicle into place. You've got performance issues in hot and cold weather, which greatly compromise the performance of the vehicle, and then you've got customers who aren't so happy about that. Who does that come down on, and what role do you play in insuring companies against those kinds of liabilities?
Well, it's such an interesting conversation simply because of there's two streams of thought when it comes to how is an electronic vehicle sold, right? You've got the Tesla model where they don't have any dealers. Tesla they have their own series of showrooms per se and some service areas around the country, but technically they do not use the classic franchise dealer model. Mm-hmm. So when something goes wrong with one of their vehicles, it has to show up back at one of the Tesla certified repair facilities in order to get satisfaction for the customer, and they're solely responsible for dealing. On the franchise dealership side, obviously, if something does go wrong with one of the vehicles, it is taken into a dealer, and then the dealer has the responsibility of assessing and ascertaining is this something that we can operate on, right? Is this something we can do here and now? Or is there going to be a request made of the factory to send other parts? And in some cases, it can be another type of technician to help them work on those vehicles going forward. So that has become one of the, obviously one of the challenges is trying to figure out, okay, on the franchise dealer side, where does that liability shift from the manufacturer to the dealer, and how much can they push down on the dealer, which is always, in any circumstance, is always a big case, especially when it comes to warranty work. Warranty work always seems to be a big headache to the dealers, and continues to be. And I'm not sure that those battle lines have been drawn exactly the way they need to yet, because in many cases, some of the major manufacturers have been seeing what they can do to possibly match the Tesla model of distribution throughout the country. And I know in my general area, the Southeast, most of the franchise laws that are down here are extremely strong, and they've just gotten stronger over the summer to dissuade the manufacturers from going that direction. But I think there's certainly those are still some battles that are going to be fought, and there is no clear path on who is necessarily responsible. Now, from a garage keeper standpoint, if somebody is servicing a vehicle and they do the usual, they were the battery and the kind of the EV parts aside, but let's say they're just working on somebody's brakes and they didn't install them properly and something happened, the garage keepers in that would respond no differently than it would for a regular internal combustion engine type of vehicle, and that would come into play. But if there is, but I certainly have pondered and had this conversation with numerous people. If there's 3 or 4 electric vehicles in the secured EV garage area, and they're left there that night, and something happens, and one of those batteries somehow goes hot and sets 3 or 4 of those vehicles on fire, then yeah, there's going to be some conversations to be had about, okay, who was responsible for that battery, and who was responsible for all the vehicles that are in there, and oh, by the way, were you maintaining the temperature that you're supposed to maintain in that particular facility? Because there's all these certain stipulations that are starting to come out, for these dealers to have to meet in order to be able to sell the vehicles. And some of this is part of that equation as well. The manufacturers are, based on the size of the dealers and where they're located, they're trying to pick and choose who they think will be the ones that are most capable of selling EVs, investing in the technology, building out their facility the way that they want them to do it, and then being able to keep that up on a regular basis. So there's a great deal that's going to be fleshed out over the next few years to see who's going to get the ability to sell the most of these vehicles. Are they going to do it according to the factory standards? And what's going to happen if something does go wrong? There's a lot of gray area. Yes.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a regional thing. I don't know that EVs for the middle class or for most people are a really great idea. If A, you have to put in a lot of mileage, and B, you do live in an area that gets some heavy weather. But you mentioned some infrastructure issues momentarily. A few minutes ago, and just recently, of course. This is such a fun interview, actually. I love this subject, by the way. But it's a major consideration. Infrastructure is a major consideration, and that includes the costs of building out the technology and the capacity with charging stations, the demand for techs to repair vehicles and manage not only service customers, but to keep fleet utilizations up as high as possible. I used to be in the rental business way back in the day, and that's all super serious business with potentially heavier costs and even heavier liability. You touched on it. Is there anything else you could add to that?
Just say in certain areas, it's already a big enough challenge trying to find, the mechanics that are going to operate on internal combustion engines, to find the expertise necessary to work on, an electric vehicle, excuse me, when you've got a dealership in a small town in Mississippi, per se, that becomes a real circumstance that's going to give the dealer some headaches, or they have to just decide maybe this is not a market that we can play, and they might be able to throw them a couple of vehicles a year, and that's what they get, and then they have to send them somewhere else to be serviced. But in order for them to get any real allocation of these vehicles, they are putting in front of them a pretty heady list of qualifications for facility must operate, the conditions in which the vehicles are kept, the condition in which the batteries are kept, if they keep any of them on site, the tools that are necessary, the technology that's necessary. I mean, this is not a this is not something that probably the average dealer can get into just from the most basic tools and equipment and training and just doing the bare minimum to their facility. It's probably not going to be something that doesn't cost them at least $750,000 to $1 million, to be able to do it right. And that's only if they're allowing them to kind of keep the basic shape and form of what they've already got. If they're going to make them build another separate facility because they want the EV facility to be the prettiest looking, hottest thing that they've got on the pavement, and that's a whole different set of concerns that a dealer's got to face.
It seems like a novelty more than anything to me. And because you have so many moving parts on it, so to speak. You've got far less moving parts than in a regular gas-powered engine, but we've got the home charging units and installation of those, which is also a point of concern that could come back and kick a dealer or manufacturer in the ass. Where does risk management abatement come into play with the charging process and componentry?
The charging stations themselves, obviously, the installation and support of those type of things is done by obviously a third party. And typically, if there is something functional that goes wrong with those machines, then their insurance is going to come into play to mitigate the exposure to the dealer.
Unless they're on the dealership grounds, right? Which
they could still be on the dealership grounds because what typically happens is there's some sort of a leasing operation that goes on with these machines, or they bought the machine, but there's someone that they establish a service contract relationship more or less to keep them upgraded and make sure that they're working the way they're supposed to be working. So now, does that mean that at any point in time in any area around the country, if something goes wrong and somebody's vehicle burns up, that they're not going to sue everybody and anybody to try to get it taken care of? I think we all know that's probably the case. But the EV, the EV side of the world is really interesting on a number of levels. I mean, we've started to notice that there are actually some OSHA restrictions that are going to be coming more into play in regards to just the shipping and receiving of regular batteries to and from a dealership. That, to be frank, many dealers don't even know that they're responsible for. Okay,
so pray tell.
We're the ones trying to point out, what's going on there. But if you put the EV battery circumstance in play, and I can't imagine, any dealer really is going to be a repository for a couple hundred of each, but they are, like you said, they can be volatile. They're very temperamental. They have to be kept in very strict conditions. And if something does go wrong in those conditions, you're talking about a very hot fire that's going to burn up a whole lot of stuff. Those are the things that we try to always, when we're on site with a dealer and we're asking about, we're walking around and looking at the condition of the dealership and the shops, and we're asking the questions about, are you guys getting into the EV world, and where would you put that facility, and what are you going to do? You can get a general idea in just the overall upkeep of the facility as to whether or not those people are going to be challenged to maintain the strict, and honestly, for lack of a better way of putting it, clean room requirements of having an EV service bay.
What does your checklist look like when you are asked to create a program for a dealership or a manufacturer, for that matter?
Well, I mean, it's a number of things, but basically, it's a lot. Some of it is certainly just culture, management related questions, things that you do as a dealership that are the things associated with. There'll be things associated with the financial aspects, how the salesmen interact with clients, how the clients interact with the people that are considered to be, let's say, the customer service side of the business. How do they interact with the service side of the business? Then there's questions that are purely from the standpoint of the physical nature of the dealerships themselves. How are they constructed? What are the safety requirements or the safety tools and things that they have on site? Do they have central alarm systems? Are they sprinklered? Or, all these different things that go into how the property is rated. And then you get into the things that are financially related. Obviously We're trying to make sure that if something does happen to a dealership, a hurricane comes through and takes down a building, we need to make sure there's income there that we can find them another building and put them back into business until the other one can be repaired. So we cover virtually every aspect that needs to be, taken care of from a risk management standpoint. But some of that is also the conversation that we have with the dealer in regards to, are they willing to self-insure any part of that? There are larger dealers out there that we're not going to walk in and give a $2,500 deductible policy when we know that they're capable of taking on a little bit more risk. That makes them more palatable to the underwriters that we're talking to, and design a program that's a little bit more robust from the standpoint of coverage limits and that type of thing, because they're willing to accept more risk. And those are just the type of questions that we typically will go through. And we try to have that conversation, throughout the year, because, it's like anything else. If you try to hit somebody with it all at once, it's, a fire hose to the face. So it's just an ongoing conversation that we have to try to hit on these topics throughout the year when we're trying to get in front of the right people and see if we can do business together.
So I was going to ask you about your value proposition, but I think you pretty much just spoke to it, which is, if there's nobody can remember a transition from one engine format to another, because the last time that happened was when the car first left the assembly line.
Right.
It went from horse to car. And that was a green solution, by the way, because there was an issue with horse manure in the streets of all the big cities, and carcasses, dead horses dropping
Right.
dead, the owners taking a good old time getting them scraped off the side. So you could only imagine what the smell of the big city was back in the day. People don't even think about that.
Right. Sure.
But it was a problem. So this engine was just, wow, look what's going on. Now we're talking about, another green technology, or at least under the guise of environmentalism and planet saving. It's probably far from green and far from being a planet saver. I think we're the bad guys there. But for better or for worse, it's not really that much affordable for the common man. But the costs for a dealer to kind of like dive right in are pretty high. And what we're beginning to see are dealers feeling a little bit hesitant to do that, to go all in. They know that they have to sell them. They want to from a profit standpoint, but the costs to get involved are so high. And now you're saying that the insurance could be substantially higher than that of a conventional engine as well?
Well, if there's a circumstance that comes along and someone has a major fire that's associated with it, yes, there'll be a lot more scrutiny on that particular client in the following year, and that is just the nature of insurance. You have losses, your premiums are going to tend to go up to some extent, but I think overall the industry as a whole is balancing somewhere on the knife's edge with that, because we've even already seen, like manufacturers like Toyota. I think they've decided that they're going to stick with the hybrid model, where you've got the combination of a gasoline and a battery powered solution, but it's not fully the EV path. The other thing about the challenges with the EV is, we've talked about this quite a bit in our world, is what happens to the used cars that don't seem to get sold. Because there's going to be a bunch of these out here eventually, right? Do those get scrapped? Do they? I mean, how do you repurpose one of those if it's the battery is near the end of its life? We really don't have they're starting to gain some technology here where they can refurbish some of these batteries and get them on the road for a little bit longer, but we're not quite there yet. And I'm with you. To me, we can talk all we want about gas powered vehicles, but we don't have enough power in places like California. They don't have enough power to power the homes that they've got there, let alone trying to plug up a bunch of electric vehicles, and power those too. And oh, by the way, where's that power coming from? And if we're burning more coal to make more power to stoke an electric vehicle, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me either. But they're out there. We're trying to make sure that we cover the dealers in the most appropriate way possible, and protect them and protect their customers.
Yeah, I saw a funny cartoon. It was just a single frame of a line of a big line, a coal hauler, a big train load of coal, and the caption was EV food. It's like, okay, I see that for sure. Well, what have we missed in this conversation? What further value and what separates the Insurance Office of America from some of those other 20 in the top 20, 25?
Well, I think
Other than Matt Pope's a good guy. He
well,
is a good guy. And by the way, I do want to say your PR gals, Hannah Conley and whoever else is involved, they really stay on top of it. So
they do quite well. That's for sure.
Yeah,
we're very fortunate in that.
They're hustlers.
I think Insurance Office of America is just we are always dedicated to more or less trying to listen to the people that we're working with and find the right solution to what they need. And I think one of the biggest challenges that faces the average business out there is that we've kind of always had the process backwards. The risk management process that I work, it basically is you identify there may be a problem. You analyze if it really is a problem, right? Once you analyze it, you figure out, okay, how do we control it? And then we finally get to the point of if something does go wrong, how do we finance the loss? That's the place where the insurance policy comes in. Okay. Because there are other ways to finance a loss. Like I said, you could self-insure, or we've talked about this today. You could transfer that risk to somebody else. There's numerous ways to do that. And that's what we're really trying to do is we drill down to figure out what's the best way for us to meet the challenge of financing a loss if there is one. And then finally, the last piece of the administration of it, if something does go wrong or it's not working, we got to go back to the top and start over and make sure we keep things the way they're supposed to be. I think that's really in many ways what separates us from our competition. We're not peddlers. We're professional insurance brokers, and we're trying to do our best to make sure that we do the right steps and utilize the right risk management tools to build a program that works within a culture that works so that we can do something that over time creates some stability in the plan. One of the worst things that happens, and I'll just use the Florida property market. You have a storm, rates go up. 5 years go by, there's no storm, rates go down.
Yeah.
Get another bad storm, rates go back up. And there's some of that you can't change. But if we can get them interested in possibly, okay, let's try to take the peaks and valleys out and make them a little bit more of a wave. That'll give you a more stable idea of what your insurance premiums are going to be. And we work with a lot of people that are also interested in acquiring other businesses. So we work to put down on paper what we call the total cost of risk. And that's a factor per $1,000 in sales that they can say, okay, if I go out and buy a new dealership that's worth $200 million and I multiply it times that factor, that gives me a pretty good idea of what my insurance costs should be. That's where we're trying to get to when we do work with dealers.
Yeah. And that's a big factor. I'm glad you brought that up because there are a lot of mergers and acquisitions.
Oh, yeah.
Certainly we did something just went down the other day. In fact, someone that we work with, but nothing like Orlando. I was trying to get my kid to, who's over there? Is that University of Southern Florida or is that Tampa? That's Tampa.
That's Tampa. Yeah.
University of Southern Florida. They reached out to him. He ended up getting a deal over at UVC to catch. He got a nice big fat scholarship. So
there you go.
The other one's going to Hawaii. I wanted one in Florida and one in Hawaii, but guys at UBC seem like good dudes.
I just want my last one out of school.
Yeah, right. But I love isn't Winter Haven? Isn't that like right north of Orlando?
Is it Winter Haven or Winter Park?
Winter Park, maybe.
Yeah, it's a beautiful. Yeah, it was a beautiful little town, and we just actually had we just did a session with the Florida Auto Dealers Association board of directors there
over there
about a week and a half ago. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was looking at properties over there. I'm in a pretty nice spot right now. But what have we missed in this conversation? Anything?
No, the only thing I would say that just kind of one of the other little oddball things that pops up as well within the dealership scope is that there's also the piece of the F&I business that a dealership does. Okay, their F&I products that they're selling, we're also starting to see. Are they covered? Are the warranties and the service protection plans and all those things, are they written in such a way where they will cover an EV? So that's just one of the other aspects that we've seen recently where it's started to have, we're starting to have conversations on that as well. And there are certainly some that are out there that already do, but it's just another thing for us to make them aware of.
Yeah, it's tricky too, because I understand that the battery warranty is no good if it falls below 75% capacity.
That's correct.
So now you've got battery maintenance costs, which, is actually probably positive for the dealership, certainly in the service department. It's, having battery checkups and such, but that's a whole nother confusing area. And I think that what happens is somebody buys an electric vehicle, and for the next 6 months, they're constantly calling the dealership, asking questions about it. And if, God forbid, the car dealership misses one phone call, their CSI score goes to shit and goes to hell. Sorry about that, trying to stay professional here. And they have to deal with that. And that's kind of, it's a big,
no, you're right. It is a whole different level. It is a whole different level. And to be honest, it's a whole different clientele as well that they have to deal with in that. So yes, they're more inclined to be a bit more picky about what they want and how they
aggressive. Yeah, it's crazy. But Matt Pope, risk manager for the Insurance Office of America, based out of beautiful Orlando, and frankly from Pittsburgh, which is a highly underrated city. But you're from Alabama, right?
I am. Our office is actually in Fairhope, Alabama.
Okay, so what are you, a Crimson Tide guy? Are you a Pitt Panther or what?
I am an Alabama fan, but I've been one since they were bad. So
I mean, say wait, when they were bad, what, for like 1 year?
Back in the late 80s and early 90s. So
it didn't last very long, like a 4-year stint, whoop-de-doo. But Saban's the greatest coach of all time in college football. I think Urban Meyer was approaching him, but then all sorts of stuff went south on his. But anyway, that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank you again, Matt Pope, risk manager for the Office of America, Insurance Office of America. Thank you for enlightening us. It's been a pleasure speaking to you, and best of luck moving forward.
Thank you very much.
A pleasure. That's all the time we have for today for the Car Motivators Webcast Network. I'm Kelly Kleiman. Have a great day.